Will you please pray with me? May the words of my mouth and meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, for you are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It's kind of a weird Sunday. It's true. It's a weird Sunday. It's after Thanksgiving, and people are up to, well, here with food. It's not Advent yet, so it's too early to talk about preparing for the coming of Christ, and it's most certainly too soon to talk about the wise ones who are following a star, and Mary and Joseph, and how they had to become refugees and flee for their very lives. So what are we to do with this conundrum? In the liturgical church, it's officially called the Reign of Christ Sunday. The Reign of Christ Sunday. But being in the desert, it hardly ever rains here, so for us, it's our Stewardship Commitment Sunday. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, we heard from a variety of people as to why being at a church whose mission is to live God's grace, justice, and inclusiveness was important to them. And those were some of the best stewardship presentations I've ever heard. We also got a view of some financial numbers that Sunday. Last week, it was me reminding all of us about the widow's mite and how that gift from God is, the gifts from God are, we need to share all that we have and all that we are, whether large or small. Well, while an entire year's worth of sermons on any 3 aspects of our mission statement would be incomplete, today I want to touch briefly on God's grace, justice, and inclusiveness by sharing some personal stories. Our scripture today is the familiar Romans 8. And it tells me that God's grace is large. Large enough to reach around the world and embrace everyone. Everyone? What about those people? Yes, they're included. They're included in God's grace. Oh, but how about yes to them too? God's grace embraces the peacemakers and those who sow chaos, the victim and the perpetrator. God's grace is large enough even for you and me. And while God's grace is bigger than you and I can imagine, I'm going to share some glimpses of how God's grace has touched me, because God's grace is also small enough to reach the cracks and the crevices of the moments you and I live in every single day. Wow, what a week. Monday, this week, my mom was in an automobile accident, and I'm grateful that she's okay and that the other driver's okay, and I'm grateful that Wendy and I both work at places where we could literally drop what we're doing and attend to family needs. And when we arrived home finally late that night after an exhausting day, the phone rang, and we each looked at each other like, oh, please, won't you answer? And I ended up being closer to the phone, so I ended up being the one who had to answer. And it was a former parishioner of mine from the 1990s. Anybody remember back that far back in the 90s? Yeah. We exchanged Christmas cards, but haven't spoken in well over a decade. He's in his 90s. He has a Scottish accent, and he said, I was looking through the old church directory, I saw your name, and something said I needed to call you. He went on to say some of the nicest things. And don't you know, I needed to hear that. Those words at that time. Small act of grace and kindness, huge impact. That's what the church is all about. That's what we do. It doesn't stop within the 4 walls of this building. It reaches across the decades, across the miles. Pop quiz time. Any of you remember what you were doing on February 26, 1978? I got to confess, I didn't remember what I was doing either. Now, I didn't say this. None of my family saved this. But Nancy Sneck did for some reason. And apparently, well, as a freshman in high school, there it is, I played the piano for special music that Sunday. In January of 2003, when I became your pastor here, she gave me that bulletin that she had saved all those years. The one I now keep in my Bible. Small act of grace and kindness, a huge impact, and that pebble was hitting the waters of rest, and it has ripples that expand throughout the years. I see God's grace woven throughout our lives, a harsh word exchanged for a kind one, an act of reconciliation and forgiveness instead of revenge. People sitting down and talking and listening and learning. God's grace is big enough to cover the tough stuff, but it's also can cover the small things that push our buttons. I see God's justice woven through our lives together here at DHC as well. I see it in our fight for marriage equality, honoring our same gender marriages and relationships as we do different gender relationships. I see it in our work at Paz de Cristo as we serve the homeless and the working poor. It's more than just bringing food every Sunday for that mission and serving food down there. It's providing a little dignity with clean socks and clean underwear and donating jeans and clothing and providing job training so that people can have a chance in life. I was told this week by Paz that we're the only religious body in this town that donates to them every month without fail. Oh, there are several churches that have food drives around Thanksgiving or some other time of the year, but we're the only one who is doing it every month without fail. And I'm proud of this church for doing that, but I also realize that this fair city has a long way to go in empowering the poor. This past year, there have been times when your church has been leading the cry of justice in other ways. This past year, we hosted the Mesa Police Department, immigration lawyers, and undocumented folks dreaming of being U.S. citizens, all in this room, talking and listening to each other. Talk about important conversations. Small act of justice with a huge impact in the people's life. God's justice is about helping people who are powerless. Howard Thurman was a prominent African-American author, theologian, educator, and civil rights leader. He wrote a poem entitled, "I Will Light Candles This Christmas." And even though our Advent season doesn't start till next week, I'd like to share it with you. It was later turned into a hymn that you'll probably find familiar. "I'm the light of the world." We're going to be singing it later on in the service. His poem reads, "When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among others, to make music in the heart. That's why I say the church is the opposite of Vegas. What goes on here in this very room doesn't stay here. God's inclusiveness. It means so much to those in the LGBTQ community. It means so much to everyone and anyone who has ever felt like an outsider. One of the family stories that Wendy tells is about her grandpa. Now, Wendy's grandpa was one of the soldiers who helped open up the Jewish concentration camps as the U.S. moved into Germany during the end of World War II. And after the war, he and his wife and their daughter, Wendy's mom, settled in a small town in the Midwest. Now, it so happened that a Jewish doctor moved into that small town, and the good Christian community was shocked and, in effect, shunned them. This didn't sit well with Wendy's grandpa. So his family got dressed in their Sunday best clothes to show respect, because that's what you did back then as part of showing respect, and prominently walked through the town right up to that new family, that Jewish family. And Wendy's grandpa simply extended his hand and said, "Welcome." And they became friends. And their daughters became friends and playmates. Because that's what God's inclusiveness is all about. It reaches beyond our particular faith, our particular culture, with an extravagant welcome. And finally, a brief story about God's inclusiveness, what it's all about for me. I got Nathan's permission to share this story. You might remember that Nathan was the drum major of the high school band a couple of years ago. This proud papa probably's mentioned that a time or two or three or four or five times. When Nathan was in the band, he was in the cool group. Got that from his mother's side, I'm sure. Well, there was a young man in that band who had the courage to come out and say, "I'm gay." And to that band's credit, in this very theologically and politically conservative community, they, for the most part, supported that kid. While hanging out in the lunchroom or the band room, they included that kid in the group. But that band is a top-notch musical band, and it travels internationally and nationally. And that year of Nathan's leadership, they went across country to the Gator Bowl to compete in a national band competition. Traveling meant hotels. When it came to travel overnight, room assignments needed to be made. Nathan was in the power seat. He was a big man on campus. Everybody wants the room with the drum major to be seen with the cool guy. Not every band member wanted to room with someone who was gay. More to the point, not every parent was okay with their kid being in the same hotel room with a gay young man. Hanging around in the cafeteria, the band room, oh, that's fine. Oh, but not in a hotel room. Oh, no. I remember asking him in just a casual conversation as the trip was approaching. "Oh, so who you rooming with on your trip?" And he hesitated, and he mumbled like teenagers sometimes do when they don't want you to hear or understand what they're saying. Blah, 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 blah. I asked again, "So who you rooming with?" He quietly said, "No one else wanted to room with." And he mentioned the name of the kid who was gay. "So I think I'm going to sign up with him." And after a silent pause, I said, "Okay." Because you have helped teach him about God's inclusiveness, he was able to put it into practice beyond these walls. Because what goes on here doesn't stay here. It goes out where we live and work and are. We're the opposite of Vegas here. What goes on here, God's grace, justice, and inclusiveness, doesn't stay here. Whoa, some may say, "I thought this was supposed to be a stewardship sermon." Well, Wendy and I tithe to this church. We are here and have our family here because all three of our children can and will learn to live God's grace, justice, and inclusiveness. Not just here, but out there. And I thank you for that gift. And I think that's what stewardship is all about. Sharing our gifts. Thanks be to God.